Hey, what's up out there, online community? And thanks for stopping by and checking out another segment of Straight No Chaser, where we talk sports and culture for fans all the time with the fans. Now, tonight I've got a very select group, and by select I mean a very special group, because we're here to talk about one of the most popular sports in America and across the world, professional wrestling, or as I like to say when I was coming up, pro wrestling. So tonight's panelists, tonight's guests, we've got Demetrius Payne, Steve Tortorelli, and Thomas O'Donnell. So before we get into our conversation, you know how we do. Raise your glasses. We're about to do our customary drink, our toast. Salute, gentlemen. We're about to get to a straight no chaser.
Salute.
So I want to start off first just with the brief introductions and background. Tom O'Donnell is here. He's got his own wrestling podcast called Catch, Hook, Shoot. And he's a huge sports fan, and he was able to translate that into a podcast and be able to have conversations about what it is he's passionate about. So, Tom, why don't you talk a little bit about what it is or how you got your passion, developed your passion for the sport, and what it is that you do is catch, hook, shoot.
Well, first of all, thanks, Stan, for having me on. It's a weird feeling being on this side of it, not being the host. But no, I've been a wrestling fan pretty much since I was about 5 years old, and I think it happened probably the same way it did for a lot of people in my age group. My first exposure to pro wrestling was seeing Hulk Hogan and Rocky III. And it just kind of snowballed from there. My mom was a wrestling fan growing up, and so shortly after that, she kind of introduced me to pro wrestling on TV and stuff like that. And I just became kind of an obsession. So, and I just, if wrestling was on, I wanted to watch it. And it's just grown over the years. And now, I wanted to be a wrestler so bad when I was a kid, but I'm not an athlete, not in any sense of the word. So, but then, as podcasting got so big, it's like, well, maybe I can do this. And it's, kind of a way for me to, put my 2 cents into the business. And it's just kind of, like I said, snowballed from there. And it's been awesome. There's, it's opened a lot of doors for me. I've met so many wrestlers, promoters, had, been able to interview some of my heroes, some current stars. And it's awesome. I love it.
Great. It's interesting that you said that your mom got you into wrestling. I became a wrestling fan because, believe it or not, my grandmother got me into wrestling.
Oh, wow.
Dorothy Lee Dixon, God bless her soul, rested in heaven. She took me to my very first wrestling match after she had already introduced me to the professional wrestling TV shows that included Dick the Bruiser, some of the other guys during that era in the AWA wrestling. My very first wrestling match that I attended was I call it U.S. Comiskey Park because the name keeps changing. But at the time, it was Comiskey Park. And we went to see the Road Warriors take on the Von Erichs, and Ric Flair was wrestling somebody. So that's how far we go back. So my very first wrestling match was with my grandmother. So it's very coincidental that you say your mom introduced you to wrestling.
That had to be in a Super Clash, right? Am I right?
It was actually after a baseball game. They set up the ring on home plate.
Oh, wow.
Look, wait, I see some laughter from the back section. Demetrius is giving me a couple chuckles in the third base gas face. But yeah, that was the first wrestling match that I went to. So, but it's interesting to hear you, Tom, talk about how you've been able to parlay that into being a fan to carrying forward something that you're actually passionate about and being able to, have this evolution of your status as a fan, and now that you're doing your own podcast. You mentioned that you've been able to meet some wrestlers, some interviews some wrestlers through your podcast endeavor. Are there wrestlers or a wrestler in particular that some of the people online would recognize by name, more mainstream wrestler?
Yeah, definitely the biggest one would be Mick Foley. I had a chance to do. I mean, it wasn't like a long form interview. It was at an event, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later because the promoter for that event is on here with us. But yeah, that was probably the high point of podcasting for me. It's WWE Hall of Famer. It's a guy that came up through the old territory system in world class and went into WCW and eventually WWE. And so that was just, I mean, I honestly, that is probably the only interview that I've had where literally my hand was shaking holding the microphone.
Yeah. I can only imagine what that feeling was like. And that was an in-person interview, not something done over call, correct?
Yeah, no, I was in person, face to face. I just the fact that he agreed to do it just to take 2 minutes out of his time because he had so many fans there to see him, that he took the time to come over to my table and talk to me. It was amazing.
Oh, great story. So Demetrius, I don't know if many people will be able to tell this from viewing it at home, but Demetrius, you're a huge wrestling fan, almost to the point that you think that you're holding a belt and up for challenges, if I'm not correct. If I'm looking at you, you're a huge wrestling fan. Talk about your passion and how you develop that in the sport.
Well, first and foremost, anybody who wants to challenge me are just people who want to lose. So just keep that in mind. But no, I very much like Tom, I got hooked at a very early age. I remember Thunder Lips in Rocky 3 and like I remember flipping through cable during the early days and seeing these two guys and they're in a ring, but it's not boxing. Why are they in the underwear? I don't understand. Yeah. But it was cool, and I really, really dug it. And I've just been hooked ever since. Being a fan is such a great source of escapism for me because professional wrestling is just it's an art. I call it an art more than I call it a sport. Because art makes you emote. It elicits an emotion from you. And anybody who's ever been to a show live, be it an indie show or a big WrestleMania show, you feel it. It's something about being in that atmosphere, and sometimes even translates when you're watching on TV. So I just always have on some merch. I always throw this belt over my shoulder when I walk into a meeting sometimes. And I'm like, do you not have one? Like, what? I don't understand the question. Professional wrestling is just a great world to get lost in sometimes, and I just love it. The older I get, even the harder it is as you get older to suspend your disbelief. For some reason, it just gets me more and more over the years. Just love it.
So let me ask you this. You walk into a meeting with the belt on. You walk into other places with the belt on. What's the response? What do people say when you walk into a room with the championship belt?
So you got to set the right tone, right? So you walk into a room with the suit on, with this belt over your shoulder. First thing out of your mouth, you got to say, the champ is here. And then you clamp the belt on the table, and then you just sit down, lean back, and just look people in the eyes and see what happens. A lot of people try to avoid eye contact with you, but when you got one of these, it's impossible. That's it.
So I'm going to tell you, I would probably look to avoid eye contact with you as well. Now, is it safe to say that if you could have it, you would have theme music when you walked in the room, or do you already have that in place?
In my head, I already do, and it changes from time to time. It depends on the setting, but I always have some music going in my head. Depending on the situation, I might have a little Mr. McMahon walk. I might have a Stone Cold Steve Austin walk. It just kind of depends on the setting.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, you know what? It doesn't get more wrestling fan than that. Last but not least, I definitely want to welcome Steve Tortorelli to our show. He is based here in the Midwest. He's an independent wrestling promoter, and I definitely want to hear what he's got to say because he's got a lot of information, both as a fan, but then also as a wrestling business person. So, Steve, welcome to the show. Can you talk a little bit about your passion, what it is that you do, and the Wrestling Association that you help facilitate and oversee?
Absolutely. So again, my name's Steve. I run Warrior Wrestling, which is based in Chicago Heights, south of the city of Chicago, not too far from downtown. And like you guys, I began as a fan. I'm a couple years younger, so I became a fan during the Hulkamania era. And as a little kid, I remember it being, 1990, and I have had every wrestling action figure in my parents' basement. I had the Hogan that body slammed. I had the Hogan that punched. I had the Hogan that bear hugged. I had everybody else. I had the wrestling buddies, you name it. So I was a big 80s wrestling, rock and wrestling boom fan. And then I really fell out of it in the 90s. As I was growing up, wrestling wasn't that great in the US, and I wasn't paying as much attention. And I came back into it in 1998. Actually, some of my best friends have been wrestling fans for a long time, telling me about how cool it was, how much it had changed, and I really needed to get on the bandwagon, and I would just fight with them mercilessly until one day they're like, all right, sit down. We're showing you this pay-per-view we taped from last week. And the pay-per-view was the WWF King of the Ring 1998. Undertaker, Mankind, Hell in the Cell, Austin, Kane, First Blood, and I was just floored. It was like, Saul on the road to Damascus sees God in the sun and he becomes St. Paul. That was my moment. I felt like I was like, God was like, watch this Hell in a Cell match and see how great this is. So from then I was off to the races, became a huge fan, went to everything, WWF, WCW, ECW, local Chicago indies. In college, I drove all over to go to all the WrestleManias. I wrote my honors thesis on the history of pro wrestling. I ended up in LA teaching for a while. I trained in pro wrestling for a little. I was no good whatsoever. I trained for like 6 months, and came back to Chicago, started going to indie shows again, and I just had a passion to be involved in some way, shape, or form. So I sniffed around, maybe helping or being a part of some small indies. It never really took off until one of my best friends basically said, you know, you need to do this on your own. You need to just do it. And we did, and we ended up pairing the idea with the school where I work as principal. And so our shows double as a fundraiser for the school. So, you know, bar, concessions, parking, all of that goes back to the school for scholarships or student activities. And so I've got this weird dual life. I'm like Batman. I'm a high school principal during the day, and a wrestling promoter at nights. But I'm living my best life, and I wouldn't trade a minute of it for anything.
That's awesome that you got this evolution of your life in wrestling, from a fan to incorporate into your educational part. You mentioned you wrote your thesis on it. You know, then you went and trained for professional wrestling. You know, now you're a wrestling promoter, and you're also using it as a business venture as well as fundraising. So I mean, you got the full gamut here. I feel like I'm talking to the Wizard of Oz right here. Like, you know, he's got everything all in one. So.
You know, it was one of those things where it took 20 years of loving it for it to come together and actually start my own thing. But I've been such a nerd about it for so long that it's just built and built and built. You know, as Demetrius and I were talking before we went on the air, I can tell you about WrestleMania 8 like that. I can't tell you what I ate for breakfast this morning. I can tell you about the Macho Man. So.
Yeah, you know, it's funny when you're passionate about a sport or something in life, certain things around that subject matter become your reference point, your frame of reference as it relates to other things that happen or other events.